Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Ladies and gentlemen, our ceremony is about to begin. Please take your spots and ensure you are maintaining physical distance throughout the ceremony, as well as ensuring you keep your face covering on to maintain COVID-19 protocols. I also request that all cell phones be silenced until the conclusion of the ceremony. Good morning, Skipper, retired guests, our civilian workforce, our fans that are watching live on Facebook, and most of all, shipmates. I am Chief Mark Summers, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for the 75th anniversary of Naval Air Facility El Centro. On behalf of Captain Bill Perkins, the Commanding Officer of Naval Air Facility El Centro, it is my pleasure to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Naval Air Facility El Centro. Chaplain Graham will now deliver the invocation. Will the guests please rise?
Let us pray. Father in heaven, as we gather here today, help us to remember that every good and perfect gift is from you. Thank you for your goodness, your kindness, and your graciousness. May your blessing be upon this base, whether at work as colleagues or in our homes to our families and friends. Bless us as a community in order that the legacy of NAF El Centro would be a spirit of faithfulness to all that is good, right, and true. May it be so for our good and for your glory. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. And now, I'd like to introduce the Commanding Officer of Naval Air Facility El Centro, Captain Bill Perkins.
Thanks, Chief. You're welcome, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests both aboard the base and those joining us virtually across the entire Imperial Valley, and most importantly, to the men and women who work aboard the Pearl of the Desert, good morning and happy 75th birthday. Thank you very much for joining us on this beautiful morning. I was truly enjoying the last couple of days of mid-70s temps, but we all know the heat's coming, and today's a reckoning, I think. In all seriousness, it's truly the weather that makes this base special. For more than 350 days a year, there is absolutely perfect flying weather, and this has resulted in a desirable training location for more than 7 decades and still going strong. Rear Admiral Bolivar, our regional commander, is on travel in D.C. and was unable to join us today, but she's given me a letter congratulating you on reaching this milestone, and we will post that letter online for everyone to read. We are also honored to have some former members of the base command triad joining us virtually with pre-recorded messages and in person, and we'll post those messages online over the next few weeks. With us this morning is Captain Retired Russ Thompson and Captain Retired Brent Alfonso, both former commanding officers of the base. Bucket, Fever, thank you so much for joining us today and for leaving your mark on the base's history. Your leadership has enabled the superstars of the entire NAFEC family to shine. Speaking of NAFEC superstars, 2 of our longest serving members will be joining us in today's ceremony. Mr. Zavala has worked on this base for more than 30 years, both in and out of uniform. While in uniform, he was a plane captain and worked on the A-7 Corsair II, which you can see on display at the front of the base. And he now runs our transient line support team. And Ms. Portwood, director of our child youth programs, is our longest serving Department of Navy civilian aboard the base. Thank you both for joining in our birthday cake cutting ceremony. And finally, I'd like to pass my thanks to Mr. Ted Gallinet, also a prior Command Master Chief and now the current president of the Imperial Valley Navy League, for providing us our 75th anniversary cake. Thank you, sir, for everything the Navy League does and to support our sailors throughout the year. More than 30 years ago, I sat in awe listening to Mr. William McKinley teach advanced navigation at the Merchant Marine Academy in northern Maine. The old adage was he'd forgotten more about navigation principles and techniques than the entire class would learn in the rest of our careers. But there was so much more to Bill than just decades of seamanship. Early on a bright Sunday morning, Bill was discussing his upcoming training with his fellow sailors back when he was in the Navy. You see, he'd just transferred off his ship, and he was awaiting assignment to begin training in aviation. Off in the distance, he heard the whine of propellers and saw the splash of shallow water torpedoes. Bill was on Ford Island in the middle of Pearl Harbor. He could see Battleship Row and saw the smoke billowing as the Japanese attack began in earnest. He and some fellows broke into the armory and grabbed some rifles and began firing back, even scoring a hit on a Zero who was making an attack run on the Ford Island airfield. Bill was also one of the very few to earn and proudly wear 3 warfare devices, as he served on submarines, on ships, and then became a pilot. He also did some of his pre-carrier qualification training out here at NAFEC in the late 1940s. As he was telling us this story nearly 50 years later, he lamented the U.S. at the time did not have the foresight to better protect those air bases. Well, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Marine Corps requested approval to establish 5 air bases on the West Coast, but located further back from the coast to better protect them from Japanese assault from the sea. In 1942, the military acquired the former Imperial County Airport for use as a Marine Corps air station. And on the 1st of May, 1946, the Department of Navy assumed control of that station, and it was redesignated Naval Auxiliary Air Station El Centro, and the journey to create the base we now know as the Pearl of the Desert began. Along the way, the base has both experienced history and had its hand in shaping it too. The initial station comprised of 2 small parallel runways, a skeet and rifle range, and turret ranges for gunnery practice, as well as a rabbit range, a rocket range, and a ground rocket school for other things that were being tested on the base. At this time, the Navy was still operating propeller aircraft such as the F-4U Corsair and the F-6 Hellcat, both flown in the War in the Pacific by Commander Alexander Vrashew, the namesake of our airfield. You may recall that after the war, Commander Vrashew came back to the base as commanding officer of VF-51, the Screaming Eagles, which is where he set many of those aerial marksmanship records. Can you imagine what it was like back then? This flag circle here dates back to the original design of the base, as does the headquarters behind you. But over my shoulder, where today is the thrift shop and Sea Cadet training area, was base operations, as the runways were much smaller and the taxiway and ramp was actually located where their hangars are today. And all of this area behind the chapel and galley was expansion and growth the base experienced in the 1960s as part of the installation's transition to the jet fighter age. And with these more powerful aircraft came a requirement for longer runways and expanded flight operations areas. In fact, in 1959, the first ever high-speed ejection seat was tested aboard the base at facilities over on the South Ramp. And with it came a requirement for new parachutes capable of withstanding those forces and the stress of jet aircraft that brand new ejection seat brought. The Joint Parachute Facility was established, and in 1964, the U.S. Aerospace Recovery Facility also operated from the base. Now, how would you like this for a job? In my headquarters is a picture of Chief Warrant Officer Charles Lane falling backwards out of a plane with his brand new parachute strapped to his back. He was part of the 65th 11th Parachute Testing Group, and that's how things were tested back then. No computer modeling or simulation, no drones or dummies, just math, solid workmanship, and a test plan that eventually resulted in Chief Warrant Officer Lane getting the nod to do it live. He just landed 4 miles to the west in the area of our training range still today referred to as the parachute drop zone. In fact, parachute testing was such a key component of the base back then that a flight demonstration team, no, not that one, they'll come later, was born in 1961 and flew missions from El Centro for nearly a decade. The Shooting Stars, that's CHU Ting Stars, were formed here, and they were the first official parachute demonstration team in the U.S. Navy. And following a brief hiatus in 1969, eventually morphed into what today is the world-famous U.S. Navy Leapfrogs. And out on the Fleet Air Gunnery Range, the precursor to Top Gun was created, and competition was fierce, as units vied for the title of Best in the West while flying air-to-air gunnery missions from this base. Numerous outlying airfields speckled the desert across the Imperial Valley, and at its peak, as many as 21,000 students were housed aboard the base, conducting training in such aircraft as the A-3 Sky Warrior, the F-8 Crusader, the A-7 Corsair, and F-4 Phantom, as well as many other historic Navy fighters and jet-powered attack aircraft. As the Navy was turning to the jet age, the nation was also turning its eyes to the stars. The space race was in full swing, and NAF El Centro played a key role. The base supported testing of the parachute recovery system for the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo capsules, as well as the Space Shuttle program. In fact, you can still see remnants of some of these tests repurposed as shade structures in the Sealy Community Park off base. Throughout the 60s and 70s, the base maintained a close relationship with NASA and the National Space Program, a relationship which continues today, as we supported testing of the SpaceX Dragon capsule parachute recovery system out at our range just prior to last spring's historic return of U.S. manned spaceflight. The Navy Flight Demonstration Squadron began winter training here in 1967, and since then the base has witnessed the Blue Angels transition through 5 different demonstration airframes, including the first ever air show of the F-18 Super Hornet this past March. I was honored to wish Boss Kesselring and the rest of the Blue Angels a happy birthday, as they also turned 75 just last week. VFA 174 was the last squadron permanently assigned to the base, and with her departure in 1979, the base assumed the role it has today, with rotational units visiting, vice being assigned permanently. And with this change came a designation to the name we have today, Naval Air Facility. And since that time, the base has been operating in much the same way for the past 30 years. We operate more than 350 days a year, and we average around 37,000 flight operations, including 11,000 sorties a year. To put that in context, that's the same number as some of the larger training bases the Navy has, such as Naval Air Station Pensacola. This base has and continues to serve an irreplaceable part of the aircraft carrier pilot production chain, as well as providing access to training ranges used by every aircraft carrier-based squadron on the West Coast, and even some on the East Coast. You need only look at our base softball field by the front gate, and the numerous logos of the legendary and historic squadrons, many of which have now decommissioned, which have visited NAF El Centro to get a sense of the history of the base. The base has also played host to some important historic figures. Astronaut and Senator John Glenn, when he was a first lieutenant in the Marine Corps, flew training missions from Marine Corps Air Station El Centro in 1945. Charles Lindbergh, following his historic transatlantic flight, served as an instructor on the F-4U Corsair and spent time in El Centro in the late 40s teaching students. And multiple presidents have stopped in for a visit, including Ronald Reagan in 1986 and most recently President Trump in 2019. The claim to fame for the base is that nearly every single aircraft carrier-based pilot has flown missions from El Centro at some point in their career. And this includes many of the most highly ranked naval aviators in our service today, as well as students in the pattern this morning just embarking on their careers. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bill Gay. Mr. Gay is our guest speaker, and he's a retired Navy officer. He spent time as public affairs, as engineer on 2 different ships, and has resided in the Imperial Valley, serving in the public affairs and information domain, working for Imperial Valley Press, and a prolific author. Sir, welcome to the base. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Captain Perkins and distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to be here today. This is the first time in my career, really, that I've served as a guest speaker. As a Navy PAO and public relations professional, I've written many speeches over the years for others and have managed to stay in the shadows, kind of like Chris over there. I have to admit, being here in the limelight's a bit out of my normal comfort level. So I'll keep my remarks brief. After all, it's been said that most speakers need no introduction. What they need is a conclusion. My job today, though, is to reflect a bit on the partnership this base has enjoyed for the past 75 years with Imperial County. It's difficult in 3 to 5 minutes to recap a quarter-century partnership between this base and our Imperial Valley community. Suffice to say, it has been a strong one. The other day, as I was wrestling with what to say, I asked a young colleague of mine what the base meant to her. Her reflections are, I feel, typical of local residents. She said, NAF has held a special place in my heart in many ways. She mentioned middle school field trips, enjoying bowling and swimming and other activities out here with friends. She also enjoyed the annual 10Ks and 5Ks. She says whether the race left from desert trails or Sunbeam, it was always fun to end the race at the base with everyone on the softball field. She notes, in some way, every person in the community has been touched by NAF El Centro, from memories formed at the air show to visits from the Blue Angels in the community. Everyone who has lived here knows when it's that time of year again, when we hear the Blue Angels fly over, when we see them on the way to work as we're heading there at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's a beauty we all take for granted, she said. There are other measurements of the community's regard for this base. Scan social media and look for criticism of NAF, and you'll be very hard pressed to find any. I'm told complaints about noise are rare, which is a rarity for busy bases such as this. There are many other examples over the years of this base's partnership with our valley. Today I'll focus on several significant but typical examples. Near the intersection of Dogwood Road and East Heil Avenue in El Centro, in front of Wymore Machine and Welding, is a piece of NAF and parachute range history. It looks like a big plumb bob. On its side are a NASA logo, an American flag decal, and the words Apollo Parachute Tester. 50 years ago, the lives of Apollo astronauts and perhaps the future of the space program itself depended upon how well this piece of equipment manufactured at Wymore could replicate the re-entry forces on command module parachutes. It was born in 1967 out of a tragedy when a fatal flash fire swept through the Apollo 1 command module during a rehearsal at Cape Canaveral. The Apollo program was set back to the drawing boards, and over the next 18 months, the capsule's escape systems went through extensive modifications that added weight to the command module. That's where Wymore and the artifact in front of the company's Dogwood Road shop came in. The El Centro business, in a contract with Northrop Venture Corporation, had been the go-to shop for the NASA contractor because their response was quick. Wymore had been working with Northrop on recovery systems for the Mercury and Gemini programs that were being tested here, and they had also been working on Apollo. After the accident, the existing parachute recovery systems had to be modified and retested. Wymore was asked to build a boilerplate capsule that matched the weight of the new and heavier Apollo command module. Northrop wanted to move quickly. They told the El Centro machine shop to build first and they would design it later. In those days, contracting was simpler. Deals were made with handshakes. The test vehicle Wymore came up with was compartmentalized with a top configured to hold cameras and electronic test monitoring devices. It could be dropped from 50,000 feet and replicate the forces on parachutes that would occur when the actual module was nearing its ocean splashdown. Wymore built the first test vehicle, and shortly after delivery, the company got a phone call. The old Apollo 1 parachute system had failed. The plumb bob was scattered all over the desert, and its tip had been driven about 50 feet into the ground. The parachute systems were then modified. The test vehicle, which was rebuilt, was on, and is on display today, is the third version that through multiple tests had finally proved that the redesigned recovery system was safe enough to get the Apollo astronauts back to Earth. Wymore Machine and Welding also did other work for the base's parachute tests, including work on giant sleds loaded with tanks and heavy equipment dropped from transport aircraft. Wymore also provided support in the development of parachute mechanisms used in escape systems for helicopters, the B-1 bomber, and parachute test vehicle mechanisms on cruise missiles that would allow the missiles to be recovered for reuse after a test fight. The story of Wymore is the story of just one of many local businesses that have been a partner with this base. Its founder, the late Dick Wymore, was a proud World War II Navy vet who loved to tell sea stories. During his career here, he was a very active supporter of the base and responsible for an annual Kiwanis Club barbecue held many years in honor of the Blue Angels. Dick was also proud to be an honorary Blue Angel. While the annual NAF training cycle of the Blues, though, is probably the most publicly noted event at NAF, this base, as we all know, is much more. The training and fleet squadrons that spend their time here, as Captain Perkins just mentioned, are really the bread and butter of this base. And this community is not shy about the fact it wants this base not only to thrive, but also grow. Two former commanding officers kept giving back to the Valley after retirement. One served as a city manager for the city of El Centro after his retirement, while the other worked for the county in Veterans Affairs and also helped build the military gallery at the Valley's Pioneer Museum. We have another person sitting out here in retired Command Master Chief Ted Gallané, who's continued his service to the Navy through the Navy League and some amazing community work. Additionally, the Navy League Council that meets here is evidence of the community support for this base. And a shout out again to Ted and his wife Lisa. That support was typified between 2011 and 2015 when NAF was competing against NAS Lemoore for home basing of the new F-35C Joint Fighter Squadrons. As we all know, Lemoore eventually was chosen, but not without a strong showing by the Valley. A committee that was led by Ted and Lisa and led by the others in the Navy League worked on this effort. It consisted of nearly 20 local citizens. Members have ranged from the city council members to city managers, chambers of commerce, and economic development leaders. Our hospitals were involved as well as members of the County Board of Supervisors and other business people. While it did not succeed in landing the Joint Strike Fighter Squadrons, we were able to demonstrate the assets of this base and the community support it has to Big Navy. Hopefully, that will help impact future decisions. The Valley has a very strong naval heritage, and as this base moved towards the century mark, our community looks forward to continuing to assist your work in any way we can. So happy 75th, and thank you for allowing me to come out here out of the shadows for this very brief time. And now, I have a special presentation for Captain Perkins. I mentioned that Valley has a very strong naval heritage. A number of years ago, I was proud to be friends with a young man up in Brawley who graduated from Brawley Union High School in 1975, continued on into the Navy, where he served a career aboard ships and as a meteorologist for the Navy. He retired as a captain, and he took up an avocation during his naval career, cartooning. Jeff Bacon is one of the best known military cartoonists in the country. And Jeff, a local product, did this special broadside cartoon in honor of the 75th anniversary of NAF El Centro. And so I'm proud to present that to Captain Perkins.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for helping coordinate that. We'll get a copy of this posted online. But in summary, it's the base CEO welcoming the Blue Angels. Why do you come back? Why do you leave Florida and come back to El Centro every year? The weather, the ranges, the unrestricted terrain, the low air traffic, and it's 8 of them going carne asada. So that typifies Captain Bacon's humor, and we are honored. The men and women of the base are honored to accept this on his behalf. So
Thank you.
Thank you for facilitating this.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commander Gay. And now it's time for our cake cutting ceremony. Our cake is being escorted by Petty Officer Ruiz and Petty Officer Martinez on behalf of the 75th Anniversary Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we will ask Mr. Zavala and Ms. Portwood to come to the front. They will be our cake cutters today, and both represent being longtime and dedicated employees on this installation. How about a round of applause for Mr. Zavala and Ms. Portwood? Thank you. And now we will invite Chaplain Graham to the front for the benediction. Will the guests please rise?
Well, let us end with this good word. Lord, may you bless us and keep us. May you make your face to shine upon us and be gracious to us. May you lift up your countenance upon us and give us peace. Amen.
Thank you very much, Chaplain Graham. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to recognize those sailors and civilians whose hard work made this event possible. As I introduce each member of this year's 75th Anniversary Committee, please come to the front after I call your name. The committee members, Command Master Chief Hubert, Amelia Gendrasina, Dennis Schouten, Chris Hawk, Anna Doty, okay, thank you all. This concludes our 75th anniversary. I'll let Miss Doty get up there. Okay, thank you all. This concludes our 75th anniversary ceremony. We would like to say thank you to everyone who continues to help us support the Navy's mission at NAF El Centro. Before we leave, please be advised we are recording video shout-outs by the MH-60 helicopter after the ceremony to be played back on our Facebook page throughout the year. If you would like to make a short shout-out recording of your experience on the base, please join us. Give the CMC a few minutes to set up, and then we'd love for you to leave us a video message. Thank you, everyone.